Let's return to one of our top stories, and there are fears Australia could be hit by an outbreak of swine fever, which has already devastated a quarter of the world's pigs. While steps are being taken here to strengthen biosecurity, similar measures have been undertaken in Indonesia. Our Indonesia correspondent Anne Barker is in Jakarta. So, Anne, what threat is African swine fever posing to Indonesia?
Andrew, at this stage, there's no report that there is swine fever in Indonesia, but in Bali, for example, which is a largely Hindu island with a large pork or pig industry, if you like, there is 800,000 pigs there, and there are steps now. There is a meeting planned next week of quarantine airline officials because of the danger that if swine flu does get into Bali, that it could then in turn get into Australia. Now, the big fear is that some scraps of food, from airline food, for example, coming from the Philippines, from China, from South Korea, these are the countries that are worst affected at the moment. It only takes the tiniest particle to get into the food chain for pigs in Bali for it then to spread very rapidly. We've already seen it in East Timor this week, and because of the flights between Bali and Australia and other countries, there is huge potential for any threat of any spread in Bali to reach its way to Australia. As I say, there is no indication at this stage that swine fever has reached Bali, but there will be a meeting next week of key officials to ensure that it doesn't spread any further.
But obviously, with Bali being a tourism hub there, it does attract a lot of tourists from...
I've lost you, Andrew.
Oh, unfortunately, I think we've lost Anne there, as she's saying. So, look, maybe we ought to come back to her. Let's return to Indonesia and our correspondent Anne Barker in Jakarta. Anne, hopefully you can hear me. So we're just talking about the threats, possible threats, certainly in Bali, which is a tourist hub. So is the concern that the disease could be brought in from other Asian nations, given there are so many tourists from China, South Korea and Philippines where African swine fever has taken hold?
That's exactly right, Andrew. There are several ways this disease can spread. It's highly contagious, and once a pig has it, there's virtually a 100% fatality rate. So you only need the tiniest scrap of food or somebody on a plane that has even the most minute particle of the disease on their clothing and their boots, whatever. And this is how the disease has spread already now to Southeast Asia. Because of the number of flights that are coming into Bali, there is concern that this disease will find its way to Bali soon. As I said, there's about 800,000 pigs at the production stage that are ready to be slaughtered at any given time in Bali. So it is a sizable industry that's getting towards 1 million pigs, an area of Bali or an area of Indonesia where pork is quite popular. Now, obviously, there are many flights to Australia, to East Timor as well, I should add. The flights into Indonesia go via Bali. So now that we have an outbreak of the disease in East Timor, there's a chance too that could spread via a plane to Bali and then on to Australia. So it's taken about a year for the outbreak in China to make its way to the Philippines, for example. Only in the last month they've detected swine fever in the Philippines. There's now a massive threat there. It's the staple food. The meat that is most popular is pork. So, of course, it could just be a matter of time now before we do see it in Indonesia. And
obviously authorities there are being vigilant, but are there any specific measures they're putting in place to prevent this from occurring?
Yeah, I think they're meeting next Thursday in Bali. There are about 80 officials, as I said earlier. The main recommendation, I think, is that restaurants and hotels don't throw food scraps, for example, into garbage in a way that they might end up in the pig food chain. Pigs, as you know, eat absolutely everything in terms of food waste. It's very common, apparently, for hotel and restaurant scraps to be sold to pig producers as feed. It's very cheap. It's a way of recycling that food. But again, as I say, you only need one tiny piece of contaminated meat or food scrap to make its way into that feed chain, and then you have one pig that's contaminated, and it's so contagious that you would expect the rest of the herd would either become contaminated very quickly or have to be culled to prevent that contamination. So I think this time next week, we will probably hear of measures that are being taken in Bali. It's quite possible other areas of Indonesia where it's Christian, where pork meat is very popular, may end up having to take similar measures as well.
And thanks very much. That's our Indonesia correspondent, Anne Barker in Jakarta.
Thank you, Andrew.